The sun hung like a molten coin in the bleached sky, casting long shadows across the town of Dustwater. It was a place forgotten by God and remembered only by the devil, where the wind carried more dust than hope and the law was as thin as morning frost in July. The town sat like a scab on the earth, halfway between nowhere and perdition, straddling the old wagon trails that snaked through the badlands of the territory. Dustwater had sprouted from the desert floor 20 years prior, when silver fever brought men with picks and dreams. Now the mines were mostly played out, leaving behind a collection of weathered buildings that leaned against each other like drunks after closing time. The main street was little more than a dusty scar between false-fronted shops and saloons, where tumbleweeds competed with stray dogs for right-of-way. Colt Mercer hadn't always been a man who robbed stagecoaches. Once he'd been James Colton Mercer, son of Ohio farmers who believed in honest work and Sunday prayers. But that was before the war, before the cavalry, before betrayal left him bleeding in Apache territory with nothing but rage to keep him alive. The boy who'd enlisted at 17 to serve his country had died somewhere between Fort Grant and the Chiricahua Mountains. What crawled out of that desert was something else entirely. He sat now on a ridge overlooking the Santa Fe Trail, his gray eyes scanning the horizon through the heat shimmer. His face bore the permanent squint of a man who'd spent too many years reading danger in the landscape. A week's worth of stubble couldn't hide the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, a souvenir from a Comanche blade that had come within an inch of ending his story. His clothes were the color of dust and shadow, chosen for their ability to blend with the terrain. The Winchester across his saddle had seen better days, but, like its owner, it still functioned with deadly efficiency. Below, the stagecoach approached right on schedule, kicking up a rooster tail of dust that hung in the still air. Colt had been watching this route for weeks, learning its rhythms like a predator studies prey. The Wells Fargo line ran this stretch twice weekly, usually guarded by two men who'd grown complacent with routine. Today would be their education in vigilance, though the lesson would come too late. He pulled his bandana up over his nose and checked the Colt .45 at his hip, the pistol that had given him his road name. His horse, a rangy black gelding with no distinguishing marks, shifted nervously beneath him. Even the animal could sense what was coming. The coach rounded the bend where the trail narrowed between two rock formations, the perfect bottleneck. Colt spurred his horse down the slope, timing his approach to intersect the coach at its most vulnerable point. The thunder of hooves on hardpan announced his arrival before his first shot split the air. "Stand and deliver!" The words came out rough, filtered through dust and cloth. The driver hauled on the reins, but the shotgun messenger was already swinging his weapon around. Colt's Winchester spoke first, the crack echoing off the rocks. The guard tumbled backward, his shotgun firing harmlessly into the sky as he fell. The second guard, riding rear, fumbled for his pistol. Another shot, another body hitting the ground with the finality of a period at the end of a sentence. The driver's hands shot skyward. "Don't shoot! I ain't armed!" Colt kept his rifle trained on the man while his horse danced sideways, maintaining distance. "Anybody inside?" "Just passengers, a woman and her young'un." Something cold settled in Colt's gut. He hadn't counted on civilians, especially not a woman with a child. Through the coach window, he could see a face, pale, frightened, a bonnet framing features tight with terror. Below that face, clutched against her chest, a small bundle that could only be an infant. "Tell them to stay inside and keep quiet," Colt ordered. "You climb down slow, hands where I can see them." The driver complied, moving with the careful deliberation of a man who'd seen what happened to those who moved too quickly around nervous men with guns. Colt directed him to unlock the strongbox bolted beneath the driver's seat. The lock gave way to reveal canvas bags heavy with payroll money destined for the mining operations further west. As Colt loaded the bags into his saddlebags, a thin wail emerged from the coach, the infant, disturbed by the commotion. The sound cut through him like a blade, dragging up memories he'd buried deeper than any grave. His sister's baby had made sounds like that, before the fever took them both while he was off playing soldier. Please, the woman's voice called out, tremulous but determined. We have nothing of value. Just let us be. Colt's jaw tightened. Stay in the coach, ma'am. This'll be over soon. He finished securing the money, then backed his horse away, keeping his rifle on the driver. As he prepared to wheel around and disappear into the Badlands, the woman leaned out the window. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25, with the kind of face that spoke of recent hardships. Those men, she said, looking at the bodies. Did they have families? The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. Colt met her eyes for a moment, gray meeting brown across the divide of choices made and unmade. Most men do, he said finally. Then he touched his hat brim in an incongruous gesture of courtesy, spurred his horse, and vanished into the maze of arroyos and mesas that had become his home. He rode hard for an hour, switching back and doubling his trail from long habit. Only when he was certain of no pursuit did he slow to examine his take. The payroll was substantial enough to keep him in ammunition and supplies for months. But as he counted the blood money, that infant's cry echoed in his mind like an accusation. The truth was, he'd let something human survive in him when he spared that woman and child. It was a weakness that might get him killed someday. But it was also the only thing separating him from the completely damned. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the rocks in shades of rust and shadow, Colt Mercer rode toward his uncertain future, unaware that his path was about to intersect with a woman who would either save what was left of his soul or destroy it entirely. Miles ahead, the town of Dustwater prepared for another night, and in O'Hara's Gold Dust Saloon, Lila O'Hara was about to close the ledgers on another day of serving whiskey to men who'd forgotten how to hope. Neither she nor the outlaw riding toward her knew that their fates were already intertwined, pulled together by the inexorable gravity of damaged souls seeking redemption in a land that offered little mercy and less forgiveness. The cellar beneath O'Hara's Gold Dust Saloon smelled of aged whiskey and damp earth, a combination that reminded Lila of graves and christenings in equal measure. She'd dragged Colt down here after the saloon closed, his blood leaving a trail that she'd have to mop before morning. The lamplight flickered across his face, revealing features carved by wind and hardship, handsome in the way a storm-scarred cliff can be beautiful. You're lucky that bullet passed clean through, she murmured, pressing a whiskey-soaked cloth to the wound in his side. He hissed through clenched teeth but didn't pull away, though lucky might be a stretch for a man bleeding in a stranger's cellar. Colt's eyes, gray as winter sky, studied her face. Why? It was a simple question with complicated answers. Why had she helped him? Why had she seen him stumble through her doors, blood seeping through his fingers, and decided to hide him rather than call for the sheriff? Maybe it was the way he'd looked at her, not with the usual hunger she saw in men's eyes, but with something closer to recognition, as if he'd found something he hadn't known he was searching for. Maybe I have a weakness for strays, Lila said, wrapping clean bandages around his torso. Her fingers were steady despite the intimacy of the task. Years of tending bar had taught her to keep her hands calm even when her heart wasn't. You got a name? Or should I just call you Trouble? Jake Coleman. He lied smoothly. Got into a disagreement over cards at Murphy's place. Lila's green eyes narrowed slightly. Murphy's had been closed for 3 days while they fumigated for lice. But she didn't call him on it. Everyone in Dustwater had secrets. It was what made the town livable. Well, Mr. Coleman, you can rest here tonight. Tomorrow you'll need to move on. I run a business, not a sanctuary. She stood to leave, but his hand caught her wrist. His touch was gentle despite the calluses that spoke of rope work and gun handling. I owe you. Men always think they owe women something, Lila said, extracting her hand. Usually, it's the other way around. She left him in the lamplight and climbed the stairs back to the saloon proper. The main room was empty now, chairs stacked on tables like skeletons of the evening's revelry. Lila moved behind the bar and poured herself a whiskey, the good stuff she kept hidden from the regular customers. The mirror behind the bar reflected a woman of 28 who looked older in the eyes. younger in the defiant set of her jaw. Lila Margaret O'Hara had inherited more than a saloon from her father. She'd inherited his stubborn streak and his head for business, along with a promise extracted on his deathbed to keep the gold dust running. It was a promise that chained her to Dustwater as surely as if she'd been shackled to the bar itself. The stairs creaked, and she turned to find Colt standing there, one hand braced against the wall. "You shouldn't be up. Couldn't sleep. Too quiet down there." He moved carefully to the bar, each step measured. "Mind if I sit?" She should have sent him back to the cellar. Should have maintained the distance that kept her safe from men who bled trouble like he bled from that wound. Instead, she poured him a whiskey and slid it across the polished wood. "You play?" He nodded toward the piano in the corner, a battered upright that had traveled from St. Louis on the same wagon that brought her mother's china, most of which had arrived in pieces. "Sometimes, when the place is empty." "It's empty now." Lila studied him over the rim of her glass. There was something in his voice, not a request exactly, more like a man asking for water in the desert. She'd heard that tone before, in her own voice, on nights when the weight of keeping promises to dead men grew too heavy. She moved to the piano, her emerald dress rustling in the silence. The bench creaked as she sat, and her fingers found the keys with the familiarity of old lovers reuniting. The melody that emerged was something her mother had taught her, the Irish air that spoke of green hills and gray seas, of places neither of them had ever seen. Colt moved to lean against the piano, watching her hands move across the keys. The lamplight caught the silver threads in his dark hair, premature aging from a life lived under harsh suns. When she glanced up, she found him watching her face instead of her hands, and something in his expression made her fingers stumble. "Don't stop," he said quietly. "It's been a long time since I heard anything that beautiful." She resumed playing, but the air between them had changed, charged now with possibility and danger. When the last note faded, they remained frozen in tableau, she at the piano, he standing close enough that she could smell leather and gunpowder and something indefinably male. "You're not really Jake Coleman," she said. It wasn't a question. "You're not really just a saloon keeper," he countered. Lila laughed, a sound with little humor in it. "Oh, but I am. That's the tragedy of it." She stood, intending to return to the bar, but he didn't move aside. They stood inches apart, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. His hand rose slowly, giving her time to step away, and touched a strand of auburn hair that had escaped her pins. "Thank you," he said, "for the music, for—" he gestured vaguely, encompassing the bandages, the shelter, the momentary peace. "Don't," Lila whispered. "Don't make this into something it's not." But even as she said it, she didn't move away. Something in his eyes held her, not desire, though that was there too, but understanding. He looked at her the way she imagined she looked at her piano, like something that could create beauty in a world largely devoid of it. The moment stretched between them, taut as a held breath. Then Colt stepped back, the spell broken. "I should rest. Let the wound heal." Lila nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him make his way back to the cellar stairs, moving like a man who'd learned to navigate pain. When he paused at the top of the stairs and looked back, she was still standing by the piano, one hand resting on the keys. "Lila," he said, using her name for the first time. "Whatever you're atoning for, whatever keeps you playing sad songs in an empty saloon, it doesn't define you." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the echoes of music and the dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. Lila O'Hara, who'd learned to armor her heart against sweet-talking men and their promises, felt the first crack in her defenses. She poured another whiskey and sat at the bar, watching the stairs to the cellar and trying not to think about gray eyes that saw too much. Outside, Dustwater slept fitfully under a blanket of stars, unaware that two damaged souls had found each other in the darkness. Come morning, she told herself, she'd send him on his way. Come morning, She'd remember why she couldn't afford to care about wounded strangers with gentle hands and dangerous secrets. But morning was hours away, and for now, Lila O'Hara sat in her empty saloon and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to be something other than what she'd become. The news arrived in Dustwater the way most news did, on the lips of dusty men who'd ridden hard from somewhere else. Tom Brennan, a freight hauler with a face like old leather, stood at Lila's bar nursing his second whiskey and holding court. $20,000 reward, he said, loud enough for half the saloon to hear. Wells Fargo's putting it up for that Colt Mercer fellow. Shot 2 guards dead on the Santa Fe Trail not 3 days past. Lila's hand stayed steady as she poured drinks, but ice formed in her stomach. Across the room, she caught sight of Deputy Boyd Harrison leaning forward with interest. Boyd was a rat of a man who'd tin-plated his cowardice with a badge, the kind who'd sell his mother for drinking money. 20,000. Boyd whistled low. Man could retire on that. What's this Mercer look like? Big fellow, they say. Dark hair going gray. Scar on his jaw. Rides a black horse with no markings. Brennan took another pull of whiskey. Cold eyes, like winter sky. Lila forced herself to laugh. Sounds like half the men in the territory. You boys better be careful you don't shoot each other by mistake. The men chuckled, but Boyd's narrow eyes fixed on her. He'd been sniffing around the gold dust for months, trying to court her with all the charm of a rattlesnake. She'd rebuffed him each time, and he'd grown meaner for it. You seen anybody matching that description, Miss Lila? Boyd asked, his voice oily with false concern. Strange men coming through? Only strange man I've seen lately is you, Boyd, she said, earning another laugh from the crowd. And you're hardly worth $20, let alone 20,000. Boyd's face darkened, but before he could respond, the saloon doors swung open. Colt stood there, cleaned up and wearing clothes she'd found in her father's trunk. He looked every inch the respectable cattleman, except for those eyes that took in the room with a gunfighter's assessment. Evening, he said mildly, moving to an empty table in the corner. Lila brought him a whiskey without being asked, their fingers brushing as she set down the glass. Locals, she murmured. Talking about some outlaw, nothing to do with you. Mr. Coleman. He nodded, understanding flowing between them in that brief exchange, but Boyd was watching, his rat's instincts twitching, throughout the evening. As Lila served drinks and deflected advances, she felt the deputy's eyes following her movements, noting every interaction with the stranger in the corner. When the saloon finally emptied near midnight, Boyd lingered. That fellow seems familiar, he said, jerking his chin toward Colt. Where'd you say he was from? I didn't, Lila said, collecting empty glasses. Man's business is his own. Boyd grabbed her wrist as she passed, his grip tight enough to hurt. You're awful protective of a stranger. Lila, makes a man wonder what you're hiding. Colt's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. The lady asked you to leave. Deputy. Boyd released Lila's wrist and turned, his hand hovering near his pistol. This ain't your concern. Stranger. I'm making it my concern. Colt's voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of weight that made smart men reconsider their options. Boyd wasn't smart, but he was cunning enough to recognize when he was outmatched. We'll continue this later. Miss Lila? He backed toward the door, eyes never leaving Colt. You have yourself a good night now. When he was gone, Lila locked the doors and leaned against them, her hands trembling. You shouldn't have done that. He'll be watching now. He was already watching. Colt moved closer, and she could see the concern in his eyes. Did he hurt you? She rubbed her wrist absently. Boyd Harrison's been hurting women his whole life, just usually not where it shows. I should go, Colt said. Tonight, before I bring more trouble to your door. No. The word came out sharper than she intended. Lila moved away from the door, began stacking chairs with unnecessary force. You're not healed enough to ride, and Boyd's probably watching the roads. Lila, don't. She turned to face him, and something in her expression made him stop. You think you're the only one with secrets? The only one who's made choices that haunt them? She moved to the bar and poured 2 whiskeys, sliding one across to him. You want to know why I'm still here? Why I'm serving drinks to men who'd as soon spit on me as tip me? Colt waited, patient as stone. I was engaged once, back in Denver. Charles Whitmore, son of a banking family. Lila's laugh was bitter. I thought I was so sophisticated, so clever. Turns out I was just young and foolish. He convinced me to anticipate our wedding vows. Then he decided a saloon keeper's daughter wasn't suitable for the Whitmore name after all. She downed her whiskey in one burning gulp. When I came home, my father was dying. Liver gave out from years of sampling his own stock. He made me promise to keep the gold dust running, said it was all he had to leave me, all that proved an O'Hara had ever amounted to anything. You could sell it, Colt said quietly. Start over somewhere else. With what reputation? The fallen woman who couldn't hold on to a society man? Lila shook her head. At least here, I'm something, maybe not respectable, but something. The space between them crackled with unspoken words. Colt moved around the bar, stopping just out of reach. You're more than something. Lila O'Hara, you're... She kissed him. It was meant to stop his words, to prevent whatever dangerous thing he'd been about to say. But the moment their lips met, intention fled. His arms came around her, pulling her against him with desperate hunger. She could taste whiskey in need, could feel the careful control both of them had been maintaining shatter like glass. They broke apart, breathing hard. Lila's hands fisted in his shirt, torn between pulling him closer and pushing him away. This is madness, she whispered. Yes, he agreed, his forehead resting against hers. Boyd suspects. The whole town's looking for you. We should... He kissed her again, softer this time, and she melted into it despite every rational thought screaming warnings. When they parted, his thumb traced her cheekbone with impossible tenderness. I've been dead inside for 3 years. He said, tonight, with you, I remembered what it felt like to be alive. Lila closed her eyes against the intensity in his gaze. Don't make me hope for things I can't have. I've had enough of men who leave me with nothing but regrets. What if I didn't leave? Her eyes flew open. You're a wanted man. They'll hang you. Maybe, or maybe I find a way to disappear. Become someone else. Jake Coleman could court the local saloon keeper proper-like. Stop. She pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. You don't know what you're saying. You're grateful. That's all. Tomorrow you'll remember who you are, what you've done, and you'll ride out like you should. Colt studied her for a long moment. Then he set down his glass and headed for the stairs. You're right. I should go. But instead of going to the cellar, he paused at the bottom of the stairs leading to her rooms above. For what it's worth, Lila, I've done terrible things, things that stain a man's soul, but looking at you makes me want to be better than what I am. That's not gratitude. That's something else entirely. He disappeared down to the cellar, leaving Lila alone with the wreckage of her carefully constructed defenses. She touched her lips, still feeling the heat of his kiss, and wondered which of them was the greater fool, the outlaw who thought he could change, or the woman who was beginning to believe him. Outside, Boyd Harrison watched the saloon from the shadows, a cruel smile playing on his lips. Come morning, he'd wire the Wells Fargo office. $20,000 would buy a lot of forgiveness for whatever happened to Lila O'Hara in the meantime. The moon hung full and bright as Lila led Colt through the narrow canyon paths north of Dustwater. She rode her father's mare, a steady sorrel that knew these trails by heart, while Colt followed on his black gelding, still favoring his wounded side. They'd left the horses at the canyon mouth and continued on foot, Lila carrying a canteen and blanket like she'd done this before. Not much further, she said, glancing back at him. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in its weathered roughness. The path opened onto a hidden grove where cottonwoods clustered around a natural spring. Years of drought had reduced it to a trickle, but water still pooled in the carved limestone basin, clear and cold under the stars. Desert willows perfumed the air with their sweet blooms, and the sound of water over stone created a sanctuary from the harsh world beyond. "My father showed me this place when I was 7, Lila said, setting down the blanket. "Said every person needs a spot where the world can't follow." Colt moved to the pool's edge, kneeling to cup water in his hands. "It's beautiful, peaceful. That's why I brought you here." She sat on a flat rock, unlacing her boots. "Figured if you're leaving tomorrow, you should see something good in this place. Something worth remembering besides blood and dust." He turned to study her, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical touch. "Is that what you think? That I'm leaving? Aren't you?" She pulled off her boots and stockings, dipped her toes in the cool water. "It's what you do, isn't it? Move on before the law catches up?" Instead of answering, Colt sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cool night air. "Tell me about the war," she said suddenly. "You have the look of a soldier." His jaw tightened. "I was cavalry, sergeant with the 7th Regiment out of Fort Grant." He picked up a stone, turned it over in his fingers. "Spent 2 years fighting Apaches, protecting settlers, following orders. Thought I was doing something noble." "What changed?" "Lieutenant named Bryson. Man had political ambitions. Wanted a victory to put in the newspapers back east. Got word of an Apache camp up in the Chiricahuas. Women and children mostly. Warriors off hunting." Colt's voice went flat, emotionless. "I told him it was wrong. He called it insubordination. When I refused to lead the attack, he had me arrested." Lila remained silent, sensing more. "3 of my men helped me escape. Good men who believed in doing right." He threw the stone into the water, watching the ripples spread. "Bryson caught them, had them shot for desertion. Then he led the raid anyway. 37 Apache dead, mostly children." "Dear God," Lila breathed. "I found Bryson in a Tucson brothel 6 months later, shot him in the street like the dog he was." Colt's hands clenched and unclenched. "Been running ever since. Turned outlaw because once you kill one man for justice, it gets easier to kill for money." Lila touched his arm gently. "You spared that woman and child. That has to count for something." "Does it?" He looked at her with haunted eyes. "How many men have I killed? Lila, how many widows have I made?" She thought of her own ghosts, Charles's smooth lies, her father's disappointed eyes, the baby she'd lost before it could draw breath, alone and frightened in a Denver boarding house. "We all have graves behind us," she said quietly. "Question is whether we let them bury us too." Colt studied her face in the moonlight. "Is that why you really stay? The graves?" Instead of answering, Lila stood and began unbuttoning her dress. Colt's breath caught, but she kept her movements matter-of-fact. "Water's cold, but it's clean. When's the last time you had a proper wash?" She let the dress pool at her feet, standing in her chemise and drawers. The moonlight turned her skin to pearl, highlighting the curve of her shoulder, the elegant line of her neck. Without waiting for his response, she waded into the pool, gasping at the cold before submerging to her shoulders. For a long moment, Colt remained on the bank, torn between desire and something deeper, a recognition that this moment was a crossing point, that joining her meant accepting whatever came next. Then he stood and began removing his own clothes, his movements careful around his healing wound. The water was indeed cold, stealing breath and thought alike. They stayed apart at first, letting the spring wash away trail dust and pretense. Then Lila moved closer, her fingers ghosting over the bandage at his side. "Does it hurt?" "Everything hurts," he said honestly. "Has for years, except when I look at you." She pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath scarred skin. "I'm not who you think I am. Colt, I'm bitter and broken, and I've done things." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "We're all broken. Lila, maybe that's why we fit." The kiss was inevitable as gravity, soft at first, then deeper as the cold water and warm skin created a universe of sensation. Her arms wound around his neck. His hands spanned her waist. And for a moment they were just two people finding solace in each other, their damaged pasts dissolving in the spring water. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard. Colt rested his forehead against hers. "Come away with me," he whispered. "Tonight, we'll ride north to Colorado, maybe Oregon, somewhere they don't know either of us. And live on what? Stolen money? I have enough to start over, buy a small ranch, raise horses, live quiet." His thumb stroked her cheek. "You could have a garden. I could build you a piano." The dream hung between them, gossamer thin and achingly beautiful. Lila could see it. A white house with green shutters, clothes drying on a line. Colt coming home at sunset smelling of hay and honest work. Children, maybe. Someday. To fill the empty spaces both of them carried. "Yes," she breathed, the word escaping before doubt could catch it. His arms tightened around her, and she felt him tremble, this hard man who'd faced death countless times, undone by a single word of hope. They held each other in the starlit water, making promises with touch rather than words, sealing a pact that both knew could end at the end of a rope. Later, they lay wrapped in the blanket on the shore, watching stars wheel overhead. Lila traced the scars on his chest, each one a story of survival. At dawn, Colt said, "We'll leave at dawn, take only what matters." "What about the saloon? Brick and wood. Your father's dead. Lila, his dreams don't have to be your chains." She pressed closer to him, feeling the solid reality of his body against hers. Tomorrow there would be consequences. Boyd's suspicions. The price on Colt's head. The condemnation of abandoning her father's legacy. But tonight, in this hidden sanctuary, she allowed herself to believe in redemption. "Tell me about Oregon," she murmured. So he did, painting word pictures of green valleys and clear rivers, of a place where the past couldn't follow. And as the night deepened around them, two scarred souls found healing in each other's arms, unaware that dawn would bring more than just a new day. It would bring a reckoning that would test whether love could truly conquer the weight of all they'd done. The night pressed heavy against the windows of O'Hara's Gold Dust Saloon as Lila counted the evening's takings. Her hands moved mechanically, stacking coins and bills. But her mind was already gone, racing ahead to dawn, to freedom, to a life with Colt somewhere beyond the reach of their respective ghosts. She'd packed light, just her mother's jewelry and a few dresses stuffed into a carpet bag hidden behind the bar. Colt sat at his usual corner table, hat pulled low, nursing a whiskey while keeping watch on the door. They'd agreed to maintain the pretense one more night. To avoid suspicion, come dawn, they'd meet at the old mining road north of town and disappear into the territory. The saloon was quieter than usual. Only a handful of regulars scattered about. That should have been her first warning. In a town like Dustwater, quiet meant trouble brewing. She was bent over the cash box when she heard it, the creak of the back door, the one she'd locked an hour ago. Before she could call out, Boyd Harrison emerged from the shadows, and he wasn't alone. 3 men flanked him, hard cases with the look of bounty hunters, their guns already drawn. "Evening, Miss Lila," Boyd said, his rat smile spreading wide. "Seems you've been keeping secrets." Colt's hand moved toward his gun, but Boyd tisked. "I wouldn't, Mercer. My associates here have itchy trigger fingers, and I'd hate for Miss Lila to get caught in the crossfire." One of the bounty hunters, a scarred man with dead eyes, moved behind Lila, pressing his pistol to her ribs. She felt the cold metal through her dress and forced herself to remain calm. "Let her go," Colt said, his voice deadly quiet. "Your business is with me." "See, that's where you're wrong." Boyd sauntered closer, enjoying his moment. "My business is with both of you. Harboring a wanted man, that's serious. Could see Miss Lila here doing time in Yuma prison." "Less, of course. We work out an arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Lila asked, though she could already see the answer in Boyd's hungry eyes. "Simple. Mercer comes quiet-like, and I forget I saw you helping him. Maybe I even let you keep the saloon, instead of seizing it as criminal property." His hand reached out to touch her cheek. and she jerked away. "Course, you'd need to be nice to me, real nice." "Show proper gratitude. I'll kill you," Colt growled, half rising from his chair. The bounty hunter behind Lila cocked his pistol. "Sit down, outlaw." "Such passion," Boyd mocked. "Tell me, Mercer, is she worth hanging for? Because that's what'll happen. Even if you somehow shoot your way out of here, every lawman in the territory will know she helped you. Her life will be ruined." Lila met Colt's eyes across the room, saw the war raging there. She knew what he was thinking, calculating odds, measuring distances, weighing her life against his freedom. She also knew what kind of man he was beneath the outlaw's reputation. Knew he'd never let her pay for his sins. "Don't," she said quietly. "Please, listen to the lady." Boyd advised. Smart woman knows when she's beat. Colt's shoulders sagged in defeat. Slowly, carefully, he placed his gun on the table and raised his hands. "All right, you win. I'll come peaceful." "No!" The word tore from Lila's throat. "You can't." "It's done," Colt said, his eyes never leaving hers. "You were right, Lila. A man can't run from what he is." Two of the bounty hunters moved in, one collecting Colt's gun while the other produced shackles. The metal clicking around his wrists sounded like the closing of a tomb. "There's a good citizen," Boyd sneered. "Boys, take Mr. Mercer to the jail. I'll be along directly, after I finish my business with Miss Lila." "No," Colt snarled, straining against his captors. "We had a deal." Boyd backhanded him casually, splitting his lip. "Deal was she don't go to prison. Didn't say nothing about leaving her untouched." They dragged Colt toward the door, him fighting every step despite the guns trained on him. His eyes found Lila's one last time, and she saw everything there: love, regret, apology, and a promise of violence if Boyd harmed her. When they were gone, Boyd turned back to Lila, loosening his gun belt. "Now then, you and me got unfinished business." "I'll die first," she said, backing toward the bar. "Maybe?" He advanced slowly, savoring her fear. "But probably not. See, you're a survivor, Lila, just like me. You'll do what needs doing to keep breathing." Her hand found the bottle of good whiskey behind the bar. In one smooth motion, she grabbed it and smashed it against Boyd's temple. He staggered, blood running down his face, and she ran for the stairs. He caught her on the landing, his weight slamming her against the wall. His hands were rough, tearing at her dress, and she fought with everything she had: nails, teeth, elbows, knees. They struggled in the narrow stairway, Boyd's superior strength gradually overwhelming her resistance. "Always knew you had fire," he panted, pinning her wrists. "Gonna enjoy breaking you." The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Boyd's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his shirt. He released Lila and stumbled back, revealing Colt at the bottom of the stairs, smoking pistol in his shackled hands. Boyd tumbled down the steps, coming to rest in a spreading pool of blood. Behind Colt, one of the bounty hunters lay crumpled in the doorway. "The others," Lila gasped, pulling her torn dress closed. "Took care of them." Colt's face was bruised, his lips still bleeding, but his eyes blazed with protective fury. "You hurt," she shook her head, stumbling down to him. "The keys." "Already got them." He held up his freed hands, then caught her as her knees buckled. "We need to go, now." Whole town heard those shots. They grabbed what they could: money from the till, ammunition from Boyd's body, her hidden carpet bag. Outside, Colt's black gelding waited alongside her father's mare, saddled and ready. He'd planned even this, she realized, always thinking ahead. As they mounted up, Lila looked back at the gold dust one last time. Through the windows, she could see Boyd's body, could smell the gunpowder and blood that now permanently stained her father's legacy. "I'm sorry," Colt said. "About the saloon, about everything." "I'm not." She turned her horse north, toward the mountains and whatever lay beyond. It was a tomb anyway. Just took me this long to realize I was burying myself in it." They rode hard through the night, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Behind them, Dustwater began to stir, lanterns lighting windows, voices calling out, the sound of a town discovering violence in its heart. Soon there would be passes, wanted posters, the relentless machinery of frontier justice grinding into motion. But for now, there was just the rhythm of hoofbeats, the stars overhead, and two people who'd found something worth saving in each other. As the first pale light touched the eastern sky, Lila reached over and took Colt's hand, their fingers interlacing across the gap between horses. "No more looking back," she said. "No more running alone," he replied. They spurred their horses toward the dawn, toward a future uncertain but no longer empty, leaving behind blood and whiskey and the ghosts that had haunted them both. Whether they'd find redemption or ruin at the trail's end remained to be seen, but they'd face it together, and perhaps that was redemption enough. The sun rose over the desert, painting the rocks in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in that vast landscape, two outlaws disappeared into legend, their love story written in dust and determination, proof that even the most damaged souls could find salvation in each other's arms. Dawn broke gray and unforgiving over the warehouse district of Dustwater, where Boyd's associates had established their temporary headquarters. The abandoned grain depot reeked of mold and rat droppings, but it served their purpose, isolated enough for privacy, large enough to stable horses and store supplies. Micah Torrance, the scarred bounty hunter who'd escaped Colt's ambush, paced the dusty floor like a caged wolf. 3 men dead, he growled to the remaining members of his crew, including that fool Boyd, all for one broken-down outlaw and his woman. 20,000 still on the table, said Luther Gibbs, a thin man with nervous hands. Wells Fargo don't care who brings Mercer in. It ain't about the money anymore. Torrance touched the fresh bullet graze on his neck, courtesy of Colt's desperate escape. Man made it personal. Through the grimy window, he could see the Gold Dust Saloon, its doors now bearing the sheriff's seal. By noon, half the town would be drunk on gossip about the shootout. The other half organizing search parties. Time was wasting. They headed north, reported Jake Cromwell. Just returned from scouting. Found their tracks leading toward Bear Canyon. Figure they're making for Colorado territory. Torrance smiled, an expression that made his scarred face even more grotesque. Good. Let them think they're safe. He turned to his men. Gibbs, you take word to the sheriff. Get a proper posse formed. Make sure they know the woman's wanted too, accessory to murder. Cromwell, ride ahead to Pueblo. Alert the law there. I want every badge between here and Denver looking for them. What about you, boss? I'm going hunting. Torrance checked his rifle, a custom Winchester that had sent more than a few souls to judgment. But first, we're going to make sure they got nowhere to run. Inside the saloon storage room, hidden behind false crates, lay the emergency cash Lila had mentioned to Colt in passing. Gold coins her father had skimmed over the years. Insurance money, he'd called it. Torrance had overheard Boyd bragging about it, how he planned to seize it along with everything else. Now it would serve a different purpose. We let it be known we found this gold, Torrance explained. Say Mercer stole it along with killing Boyd. Turns a simple murder into grand theft. Every bounty hunter in 3 states will come running. That's clever thinking, Gibbs admitted. Man doesn't survive in this business without being clever. Torrance loaded extra ammunition into his saddlebags. Mercer made one mistake. He let sentiment cloud his judgment. Came back for the woman instead of running clean. That weakness will kill them both. Miles to the north, unaware of the net closing around them, Colt and Lila pushed through Bear Canyon as the morning sun climbed higher. The narrow passage wound between towering red rocks, following an ancient riverbed that now held only memory of water. Their horses picked their way carefully over loose stones, the sound echoing off the canyon walls. We need to rest the horses, Colt said, noting the lather on his gelding's flanks. They'd ridden hard through the night, putting distance between themselves and Dustwater, but exhausted mounts would serve them poorly if pursuit caught up. They found shelter in a natural alcove where seep water had carved a shallow cave, while the horses drank from a puddle fed by the seep. Lila collapsed onto a flat rock, her fine dress now torn and dusty beyond recognition. "I must look a sight," she said, attempting to pin up her tangled hair. "You look beautiful." Colt knelt beside her, using his canteen to wet his bandana. Gently, he wiped the dust from her face, his touch tender as a mother with a child. "I'm sorry, Lila, this isn't the escape I promised you. Stop apologizing." She caught his hand, pressed it to her cheek. "I knew what I was choosing. I'd rather be running with you than safe in a cage." He kissed her then, pouring all his fear and love and desperate hope into the contact. When they parted, she saw the weight he carried, not just of his own past, but now of hers as well. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "The money I have hidden, it's not far from here. Cash buried near Widow's Peak. About a day's ride, enough to get us started new somewhere." "Blood money," she said, but without judgment. "Yes, but it'll buy us clean lives if we can reach it." A sound echoed through the canyon, the distant clatter of hooves on stone. Both froze, listening intently. The sound came again, closer. "Could be anyone," Lila whispered. "Travelers, miners, could be." But Colt was already moving, checking his weapons, calculating angles. "Get behind those rocks. If shooting starts, you take my horse and run. I'm not leaving you." "Lila." "No." Her green eyes flashed with determination. "We run together or not at all." The riders came into view. 5 men, moving fast but careful, studying the ground for signs. Colt recognized the trackers' posture, the way they rode ready for trouble. These weren't casual travelers. "Posse," he breathed. "Must have picked up our trail quicker than I thought." They pressed deeper into their hiding spot, hardly daring to breathe as the riders approached. The lead man, a grizzled veteran with a marshal's star, called a halt directly below their position. "Tracks lead this way, Marshal." One of the men reported. "Fresh, maybe 4 hours old. They're headed for Widow's Peak." The marshal mused. "Probably got supplies cached there. Simpson, take 2 men and ride ahead. Set up an ambush. Rest of us will follow steady. Push them into the trap." Colt and Lila exchanged glances. Their destination was compromised, their escape route cut off. As the posse split up and continued through the canyon, Colt's mind raced through possibilities, each more desperate than the last. "We go back," Lila suggested once the riders were gone. "Circle around. Find another way. They'll have men watching the back trail by now." Colt studied the canyon walls, noting handholds and ledges. "But maybe we don't need to go around." It took him precious time to explain his plan, and Lila's face paled as she understood. "You want us to climb? In these clothes? With pursuit closing in?" "It's that or fight 5-2 odds in a box canyon." He touched her face gently. "I know you're strong enough. Question is whether you trust me enough." She looked at the sheer rock face, then back at him. "Show me where to put my hands." They left the horses, no way to get them up the cliff, taking only what they could carry. Colt went first, testing each hold, calling down guidance. Lila followed, her dress catching and tearing on the rough stone, her hands soon bloody from the climb. Below them, the canyon floor dropped away, a fall that would mean certain death. Halfway up, her foot slipped. For a terrifying moment, she hung by her fingertips, skirts tangling her legs, vertigo pulling at her. Then Colt's strong hand caught her wrist, hauling her up to a narrow ledge. "I've got you," he gasped. Both of them pressed against the rock face. "Don't look down. Just look at me." She met his eyes, finding strength there, finding reason to continue. They climbed on, inch by tortuous inch, racing against time and exhaustion. Behind them, they could hear voices echoing up from the canyon, the posse returning, finding the abandoned horses, realizing their quarry had gone vertical. "There!" someone shouted. "On the cliff!" The first shot rang out, chipping rock near Colt's head. He pressed himself flat, shielding Lila with his body as more bullets whined past. They were almost to the top, so close to escape, but the firing was intensifying. "Go," Colt urged. "I'll hold them off." "We go together," she reminded him fiercely, continuing to climb. More shots, more shouts. Colt drew his pistol awkwardly with one hand while clinging with the other, returning fire to make the posse seek cover. Then Lila was at the top, rolling over the edge, reaching back for him. He grabbed her hand just as a lucky shot found its mark, lead tearing through his shoulder, spinning him out into space. Only her grip kept him from falling, her surprising strength born of desperation hauling him up and over. They lay gasping on the cliff top, Colt's blood soaking into the red stone. Below, they could hear the posse organizing, looking for another way up. They had minutes at most. "Can you ride?" Lila asked, tearing strips from her petticoat to bind his wound. "Can you steal horses?" he countered with a pained grin. As it turned out, she could. The cave mouth yawned like a wound in the mountainside, half hidden behind a fall of rocks and scrub pine. Lila had found it by accident while searching for shelter, the setting sun revealing its entrance when shadows fell just right. Now it served as their sanctuary, though sanctuary seemed too gentle a word for this desperate hiding place. Inside, Colt lay on a bedroll made from her torn petticoats and his coat, fever burning through him like wildfire. The bullet had passed through his shoulder, but the climb and hard riding afterward had torn the wound wider. Infection had set in with vicious speed, turning his skin hot and his eyes glassy. "Water," he mumbled, lost in delirium. Lila pressed a damp cloth to his forehead, using precious water from their dwindling supply. They'd been in the cave 3 days now, ever since she'd half carried, half dragged him here when he could no longer stay in the saddle. The stolen horses were hidden in a grove below, but she hadn't dared venture far, torn between the need for supplies and fear of leaving him alone. "I'm here," she whispered, though she wasn't sure he could hear her anymore. "Stay with me, Colt, please." She'd done what she could with what little they had, cleaned the wound with whiskey from his flask, packed it with moss and spider webs like her grandmother had taught her, kept it wrapped in the cleanest cloth she could manage. But without proper medicine, without rest and care, she was fighting a losing battle. Outside, night fell like a curtain, bringing cold that seeped through the rock. Lila built up their small fire, risking the smoke for warmth. In its flickering light, she opened the journal she'd found in Colt's saddlebags and began to write. "Day 4. He's worse. The fever won't break. I've used the last of the whiskey. And we're down to half a canteen of water. I could ride for help, but where? Every town will have our faces on wanted posters by now." "I think about that house in Oregon," he described. "Wonder if it was ever real or just another dream we told ourselves. If he dies, I'll follow. Not from grief alone, but because without him, I have no idea who I am anymore." A sound outside made her freeze, the scrape of boot on stone. She grabbed Colt's pistol, checking the chambers. 3 bullets left. She'd make them count. Lila O'Hara. A voice called from the darkness. "I know you're in there." She recognized the voice. Micah Torrance, the scarred bounty hunter from the Saloon. Her blood ran cold. "Your man's hurt bad." Torrance continued, his tone conversational. "Been tracking that blood trail for 2 days. Figured you'd gone to ground somewhere close. Just had to wait for the smoke to give you away." "Get away from here," she called back, trying to sound stronger than she felt. "Can't do that, Miss C. You and Mercer are worth a fortune." "More now. Actually, seems Boyd had quite a bit of gold hidden away that's gone missing. Funny how that happens." Lila's mind raced. He was alone, or he'd have already rushed the cave. That gave her a slim advantage, but not much of one. "Here's what I'm thinking," Torrance went on. "That wound's festering. Mercer's probably half dead already. You come out peaceful like. I'll see he gets a doctor before we head back. Might even live long enough to hang proper. Go to hell." His laugh echoed off the rocks. "Probably will, eventually, but not today. See, I'm a patient man. Miss O'Hara. I can wait out here while you watch him die slow, or you can be sensible. Your choice." Behind her, Colt stirred. his eyes focusing momentarily. "Lila?" She moved to him quickly, keeping the pistol trained on the cave mouth. "I'm here. The money," he whispered urgently. "Widow's Peak, north face, 3 rocks shaped like a cross, 20 paces east. Shh, save your strength." "No." His hand caught hers with surprising strength. "If I don't, you take it. Start over. Promise me. We'll start over together." He smiled sadly. "Always were too optimistic for your own good." His eyes drifted past her to the cave entrance. "How many?" "Just one, the scarred one from town." "Torrance." Colt tried to sit up. Failed. "Man's a killer. Won't keep his word about any doctor." "I know." "Then you know what has to be done." She met his eyes, understanding passing between them. "Yes." "Miss O'Hara?" Torrance called. "Getting mighty cold out here. What's it gonna be?" "I'm thinking," she called back. Then, quieter to Colt. "Can you stand?" "For you, I can try." Together they got him upright, leaning heavily against the cave wall. Lila tore more strips from her dress, padding them thick. "When I move, you press this tight to the wound. Try to stay conscious." "What are you planning?" She kissed him soft and quick. "What you do for me." Before he could protest, she called out, "All right, Torrance, I'm coming out. Just promise you'll get him help." "You have my word," the bounty hunter replied, and she could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Lila tucked the pistol into her skirts and moved toward the entrance. "I'm unarmed." She lied. "Don't shoot." She emerged slowly, hands visible but positioned to reach the hidden weapon. Torrance stood 20 feet away, rifle aimed but relaxed. The moon was bright enough to see his scarred face split by a grin. "Smart choice. Miss, now step away from the cave. Nice and easy." She took 3 steps, then stumbled, catching herself with a cry. As Torrance instinctively moved forward, she drew and fired in one smooth motion. The bullet caught him center chest, spinning him around. She fired again as he fell, making sure. The shots echoed through the canyon like thunder. If Torrance had partners nearby, they'd heard. Time was running out faster now. She searched his body quickly, finding ammunition, food, and most precious of all, a bottle of laudanum and clean bandages. His horse stood tied nearby, saddlebags full of supplies. She led it back to the cave where Colt had managed to stay upright. "That was damn fine shooting," he said, voice weak but admiring. "You're a good teacher." She helped him back down, already opening the medical supplies. "This is going to hurt." The next hour was torture for both of them. She cleaned the wound properly, stitched it with thread from Torrance's kit, dosed Colt with enough laudanum to ease the pain without knocking him out completely. By the time she finished, both were exhausted. "We can't stay," Colt mumbled through the opium haze. "They'll come looking for him." "You can't ride." "Can't stay either." He gripped her hand. "Help me up. We'll go slow. Find somewhere else to hide. Buy another day." She knew he was right. Come dawn, Torrance's partners would track him here, find his body, and their slim chance of escape would vanish. So once again, she got him on his feet, onto a horse, and they rode into the darkness. The laudanum helped, letting him stay in the saddle as they picked their way through treacherous mountain paths. Lila led Torrance's horse, laden with supplies that might keep them alive a little longer. As dawn approached, she spotted another shelter, an old prospector's shack, abandoned but still standing. Inside, she made Colt as comfortable as possible on the moldy straw tick that served as a bed. His fever had broken, the proper medicine finally taking effect, but he was weak as a newborn colt. "You saved my life," he said, as she tucked blankets around him. "You saved mine first." She sat beside him, exhausted beyond measure. "We're even." "No." He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. "I'll never be even, but I'll spend whatever time we have left trying." "Rest now," she urged. "Get strong. We're not done running yet." He slept then, and she kept watch, Torrance's rifle across her lap. Through the shack's single window, she could see storm clouds building over the peaks. Snow coming early this year, which might hide their tracks or trap them in the mountains. Either way, their fate would be decided soon. In her journal, she wrote, Day 5. He's going to live. I know it now. Feel it in my bones. We'll make it to that hidden money. Make it to Oregon or California or wherever the trail leads. We'll build that house with green shutters, plant that garden, live those quiet lives we dreamed about. Or we'll die trying, but either way, we'll be together, in this world or the next. Together. That's all that matters now. The first snowflakes began to fall as the sun climbed higher, covering the blood and tracks and violence of the night before. In the prospector's shack, two outlaws held each other against the cold, their love the only warmth in a world turned winter white. 1 year later. Montana Territory. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Bitterroot Valley as Lila stepped onto the porch of their small cabin, coffee steaming in her hands. The mountains rose majestic in the distance, their peaks already white with early autumn snow. From the barn, she could hear Colt working with the horses, his low voice carrying on the crisp air as he gentled a young mare. They'd become the Collinses here, John and Margaret Collins, a couple from Kansas looking for a fresh start. Their neighbors, scattered though they were in this vast landscape, knew them as quiet folks who kept to themselves but would lend a hand when needed. No one questioned their past or the way John's hand sometimes moved instinctively toward his hip, or how Margaret could handle a rifle better than most men. The money from Widow's Peak had bought them this piece of heaven 40 acres of good grassland, a sturdy cabin, and a small herd of horses that Colt was building into something worthwhile. It wasn't the grand ranch he'd described in his fevered dreams, but it was theirs, honest and clean. Lila's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach, still flat, but carrying a secret she'd confirmed only yesterday. She'd tell Colt tonight, after supper, when the work was done and they sat by the fire as had become their custom. The thought of his face when he learned he'd be a father made her smile. Mrs. Collins! The shout shattered her reverie. A rider approached fast from the main road, and Lila's blood chilled as she recognized Tom Garrett, the territorial marshal who'd been friendly with them since their arrival. Too friendly, perhaps. She set down her coffee and moved to where the shotgun rested just inside the door. "Morning, Marshal," she called as he reined up. "What brings you out this way?" Garrett dismounted, his weathered face grave. "Afraid it's not a social call. Ma'am, is your husband about?" In the barn, her fingers tightened on the doorframe. "Something wrong?" "Might be." He removed his hat, a gesture of respect that somehow made things worse. "Got a wire yesterday from Denver. U.S. Marshal's office is sending a man up here, following up on some old business from New Mexico territory." Colt emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His easy stride checked slightly when he saw Garrett, but he continued forward with studied calm. "Marshal, everything all right? Was just telling your wife. John, federal man coming up from Denver. Something about a situation in a town called Dustwater last year. Apparently, there was a witness came forward recently. Changed the whole complexion of things." Lila's heart hammered, but she kept her face neutral. "I don't understand. What's that got to do with us?" Garrett studied them both, his lawman's eyes missing nothing. "Well, that's the interesting part. This witness, a Mrs. Sarah Hartley, claims she was on a stage that got robbed by some fellow named Colt Mercer. Says he spared her and her baby when he could have killed them. She's been following the case, seems like, and when she heard about a deputy named Boyd Harrison getting killed while trying to arrest Mercer, she decided to speak up. Still don't see," Colt began, but Garrett held up a hand. "She says Boyd was corrupt, in league with bounty hunters who were planning to murder both Mercer and some Saloon woman who'd been hiding him. Says if Mercer killed Boyd, it was self-defense or defending an innocent woman." Garrett's eyes never left Colt's face. "Federal marshal wants to reopen the case, maybe clear some names. Thought you folks should know, being from Kansas and all." These federal boys sometimes cast a wide net, ask a lot of questions. The silence stretched taut between them. Lila could see Colt's jaw working, weighing truth against lies, freedom against flight. "When's this federal man due?" Colt asked, finally. "Week, maybe 2. Depends on the weather." Garrett settled his hat back on his head. "You know, it's funny. I've been in this business a long time. Seen a lot of men on the run. They got a look about them, jumpy, always watching the horizon. But you folks, you seem settled, like you found what you were looking for." "We have," Lila said quietly. Garrett nodded slowly. "Good land here. Good place to raise a family. Be a shame if someone had to leave it behind because of old troubles that might not even be troubles anymore." He mounted his horse, then paused. "You know, if this Mercer fellow was to turn himself in, with this new testimony and a good lawyer, might be he'd find more mercy than he expects, especially if he'd been living clean since making something honest of himself. Course, that's just speculation." "Of course," Colt agreed carefully. "I'll be heading to Missoula tomorrow," Garrett added. "Gone for about a week. Terrible time to be away. What with federal marshals possibly showing up? But duty calls." He touched his hat brim. "You folks have a good day now." They watched him ride away in silence. When he was gone, Lila moved into Colt's arms, feeling him tremble slightly against her. "He knows," Colt said. "He's giving us a chance. Run or face it." "I won't run. Not anymore." He pulled back to look at her. "But you could take the money, go somewhere safe. We've had this conversation before." She interrupted. "My answer hasn't changed." They stood there in the morning light, holding each other, weighing their options. Finally, Colt spoke. "If I go back, if I turn myself in with this new testimony, there's no guarantee." Lila finished. "You could still hang, or I could go free, legal. No more looking over our shoulders. No more false names." His hand moved to her cheek. "Our children could use their real name." "Children." She caught his hand, pressed it to her still flat stomach. "How did you know?" His eyes widened with wonder. I just hoped." "Oh, Lila." They clung together, tears mixing with laughter, the weight of their decision making the moment bittersweet. When they finally separated, Colt's face had taken on the determined look she'd first seen that night in the saloon. "I'll ride to Missoula tomorrow. Turn myself in proper. Garrett's a good man. He'll make sure I get a fair hearing. We'll ride to Missoula." She corrected. "I'm not letting you face this alone." 3 months later, Missoula Courthouse. The courtroom was packed despite the bitter January cold. Word of the trial had spread. The outlaw who'd turned himself in. The saloon woman who'd stood by him. The witness who'd traveled from New Mexico to testify. Lila sat in the front row, her pregnancy now showing despite the loose dress. She watched as Sarah Hartley took the stand, the same young mother from the Stagecoach, now composed and determined. "He could have killed us all," Sarah testified. "That's what outlaws do, isn't it? But he saw my baby and he stopped, told me to stay quiet and we'd be safe. I'll never forget his eyes. There was kindness there, buried deep but still alive." The prosecutor tried to shake her story, but Sarah held firm. Other witnesses followed, people from their Montana community who testified to John Collins' character, his honesty, his hard work. Even Marshal Garrett took the stand, describing how Colt had voluntarily surrendered despite having successfully escaped. When the verdict came, guilty of robbery but not murder, sentenced to 5 years with possibility of early release for good behavior, Lila wept with relief. It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't the noose either. They allowed her a moment with him before they took him away. Colt's hands were shackled, but his eyes were clear, peaceful in a way she'd never seen before. 5 years, she said. "I'll wait. I know you will." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Take care of our baby. Tell them their father's paying his debts so they can hold their head high." I'll tell them their father's a good man who lost his way but found it again. Because of you, he whispered. All because of you. 4 years later. Deer Lodge Penitentiary. The gates of the prison creaked open on a December morning, snow falling soft and silent. Colt stepped out, thinner but unbowed. Carrying his few possessions in a canvas bag, he'd served 4 years, released early for good behavior and work teaching other inmates to read. A woman waited by a wagon, bundled against the cold. Beside her, a small child of 3 years played in the snow, laughing at the white flakes. Lila's face lit up when she saw him, and she ran the last few steps, throwing herself into his arms. "You're home," she whispered against his neck. "You're finally home." The child toddled over, looking up at the stranger with curious eyes. Colt's eyes. Gray as winter sky, but warm with life. "Emma," Lila said, "this is your papa." The little girl studied him solemnly, then raised her arms. "Up." Colt lifted his daughter for the first time, tears streaming down his weathered face as she patted his cheeks with chubby hands. Over her head, he met Lila's eyes. "Ready to go home, Mr. Mercer?" "More than ready, Mrs. Mercer." They climbed into the wagon together, a family complete at last. As they rode away from the prison, Colt turned for one last look at the walls that had held him. "No more looking back," Lila reminded him gently. "No," he agreed, pulling his girls closer. "Only forward now." The snow continued to fall, covering their tracks, blessing their new beginning. Somewhere in the Montana mountains, a small ranch waited, with horses in the barn and smoke rising from the chimney. It wasn't grand, but it was honest and theirs, bought with blood and tears and a love that had survived the worst the frontier could offer. They'd been the stagecoach thief and the saloon heiress, outlaws both in their own ways. Now they were simply the Mercers, proof that redemption was possible for even the most damaged souls, that love could bloom in the harshest ground, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the Wild West gave second chances to those brave enough to seize them. Thank you all for listening to this tale of love and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this story from. Leave a comment below and let's share our love for these frontier tales. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of the untamed frontier, and share your thoughts on Colt and Lila's journey. Until next time, partners, keep your powder dry and your hearts open.